billions of dollars left over. So, and that's the reality in all over the country. Like Warren Buffett could do this in Omaha, Elon Musk could do this in Austin, Jeff Bezos could do this in Seattle. So it's not a question of resources. It's a question of how those resources are allocated. That we really can do big things like abolish poverty outright, which is what Dr. King wanted to do before he was murdered, or reparations at the scale of the racial wealth gap. There's plenty of resources for those kind of policies.
Right.
The question is, how do you get political will, particularly in a society where wealth inequality is so high and basically the elite run the political system? And there's no easy answers there, but I think the way I think about it is if we have a quote unquote democracy that like really enables people to vote with their dollars more than their personhood, that we have a society where, rich white men have thousands of votes, for every rich white man has thousands of votes, and Black women in poverty have a tenth of a vote, which obviously harkens back to some of our history where some of that was more explicit. And so
3/5 of a man.
Yeah. So what I'm focused on is this idea of like, how can we move even some of us, who have that disproportionate power in society, and to shift our energy and resources to amplifying those whose voices are underheard in the existing system, and that it doesn't actually require that we shift the majority of rich white men or even the majority of white people, for example, to pass progressive policies. Like Dr. King, his entire life up until his death, he never had majority support from white America, and still we pass civil rights legislation. So I think a lot of people, a lot of rich white men I've experienced who have some sense that the system is broken and want to change it, feel like it's just too hard to move the needle. And I think, what I've tried to explain to folks is that if even a few folks move, first of all, that can be significant if you have a lot of wealth and power. And it's also the case that helps to catalyze a cultural shift, that it makes it harder to be a status quo rich white man every time one of us steps out in a different way. And so I really think that there's a potential to reach a tipping point on some of these issues where it's not necessarily the, all of the privileged or all of the elite who step in, but enough do that we can move the block on these big policies.
Let me ask you a question about the mindset at this level of wealth, because you've talked to a lot of very wealthy people, and as you say, there are these incredible things that the very wealthiest could do and still have tens of billions of dollars. I know I experience as someone, I'm a white man. I think at this point it's fair to say that I'm in the middle class, but I grew up in more strapped economic circumstances, and I still don't feel secure in that, just because of the way our economy works, even though I'm in a much better place than I was, say, 10 or 15 years ago. But I've got to ask, does that mentality of fear about the scarcity of resources continue at that ultra wealthy level, and is part of the key to thinking about how to unlock this system, getting into those minds and saying, hey, you're going to be okay. You can still live in the same way as you do now, and make the world a much better place. You don't have to worry about it. What are people thinking? Because I heard, maybe 15 years ago, somebody who's pretty wealthy, not at that level, say, well, you can only wear so many suits. You can only, wear one set of clothes a day. What are you going to do with all that money, being the point? How does someone at that level of wealth think about things? And do they still have the same kinds of fears that we do when we're still struggling from day to day?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I do think there's certainly an element of fear, that it's a fear of the unknown. That I think of the ultra rich I know, I don't think I know any that are fearful that, they're going to end up on the streets or without enough to eat or things like that, that I think that's so far beyond
Yeah,
what they could imagine that
right.
those fears are not present.
Mhm.
But I think there are real fears around losing status, losing
Okay.
power,
Right.
and also, what does it look like to live in an equitable society that, like, will I be safe? Will I be secure? Will my kids be secure?
Right.
So I think a lot of those fears are pretty prominent. And I think one of the things that's interesting about this discussion in the context of patriarchy specifically is that, patriarchy really encourages men to shut down all of
Yeah.
their emotions except anger. So I don't know a lot of rich white men who would articulate that they feel scared
Right.
about some of the
Exactly.
stuff. And what you're
Quite
more
true.
likely to hear is like, oh, I'm angry about how you're rocking the boat or going to make things worse or whatever else. But underneath that anger, I think is often the fear that you're talking about. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of what I try to do in my work is really, and you were kind of alluding to this a bit earlier, that I try to make the case that overall we would be better off in an equitable America. And I mean that at a national level, but I also mean that at an individual level. So at a national level, it's more economic growth if we're investing in all of our people and their talents and their creativity. For democracy, that we have a stronger democracy if every voice is heard, if people are educated and so forth. So there's those kind of arguments, but then also on an individual level, what does it look like to feel meaning from participating in a society where you're relieving a lot of suffering?
Yeah.
What does it mean to, for white people to reconnect with ancestry and spirituality beyond whiteness? That I think it really wasn't until I went down this path that I really reconnected with Judaism and what my ancestors prioritized, for example.
Right.
For men, what does it look like for us to have access to other emotions like beyond anger? What does it look like for us to have enough control over our emotions that we don't yell at our kids and see them cry because we yelled at them? There's all of these ways where even though the system works very well for rich white men in many ways, and in particular works really well for rich white men materially, it doesn't work perfectly for everybody. And I think part of that is that we have a system that kind of looks at everybody as a dollar sign,
Yeah.
and if you have a lot of dollars, that you're going to feel better about yourself, have, enjoy the status of it and the fruits of that. But none of us want to get looked at as a dollar sign. And I actually find that, part of what sometimes holds rich white men back is this sense that, bizarrely maybe, that we're being dehumanized, that
Yeah.
all that people want from us and people like us is our money. They don't actually care about our humanity or point of view or anything else. So I think that's one of our big challenges in society is like, how do we really celebrate everybody's humanity, everybody's uniqueness, and not convert them into a dollar sign, whether there's somebody we're employing or somebody we're asking for money from.
In your experience, given everything that you've gone through and the people that you've spoken with, do you think there is a good hope that we could have a little more God and a little less mammon?
It's a good question, and it's interesting that I was giving a book talk at Politics and Prose in DC yesterday, and one of the guests made a comment to another guest who I knew that was like, oh, this guy seems like it's great, but he seems idealistic and naive and so forth about how things really work. And I think maybe what this person didn't quite understand in my approach is that I'm choosing hope. I actually pretty easily, I think, could have written a book that talked about the high inequality we have in our society, the concentration of power. And I could have written a book about how this country is doomed, the world is doomed, the world's going to end, humanity's going to end. I actually think that I could make a pretty compelling case for that being our future, if that's what I wanted to do. But I choose.
I read a few books like that, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot out there that suggests that that very well could be our path, and I think, for me, I've really chosen intentionally to go down the path of hope, not because I'm certain that's going to happen, but just the alternative is, helping to initiate a self-fulfilling prophecy that humanity and this planet goes extinct. So I definitely get discouraged and, certainly wonder how much impact I or anyone else can make at times. But I think I really, Miriam Kaba, the activist, she really talks about hope as a discipline, like that it's a muscle to exercise, and it can atrophy if you don't exercise it. And so I really try to believe in hope, invest in hope, even if I'm not certain that that hopeful reality will materialize.
Well, let us hope then that this interview at least has been an exercise in working towards a better future and being hopeful regardless of how we might actually see our current conditions in a very material sense. Because I suppose one positive thing that we as humans have is the ability to project a different future than we seem destined for. And I hope that that is something that people get when they hear this and that they get when they read your book. We've been speaking with Garrett Neiman. He is the author of Rich White Men, What It Takes to Uproot the Old Boys Club and Transform America. Garrett, thank you so much for being with us today on Facepalm America.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate the time. Really nice to meet you. Thanks for the work you do.
This is Facepalm America. Thanks so much for listening to us today. Please go to our website, facepalmamerica.com, listen to past episodes, share this episode with a friend. You can put the links out there on social media. You can go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or other platforms that allow you to rate and review us. Please give us a 5-star review. It really helps what we do and expands our program and our ability to get the word out there. And until next time, enjoy the day.